Alexander Mitchell had always prided himself on being a rational, data-driven leader. His background in computer science and business had taught him to trust in the objectivity of numbers, to believe that with enough data and computational power, any problem could be solved. This worldview had served him well as he built Quantum Vision from a small startup into a technology powerhouse valued at billions of dollars. On this particular Thursday morning, as he strode through the gleaming headquarters of his company, Alexander felt a particular sense of pride. Today was the day they would implement Project Optimization, a groundbreaking initiative that would use artificial intelligence to streamline the company's workforce based on purely objective measures of performance and value. No more subjective evaluations, no more office politics, no more unconscious biases. Just pure data-driven decision-making that would identify the most valuable contributors and eliminate redundancies. It was, he believed, the future of human resources management, and Quantum Vision would be at the forefront. Little did he know that this day would mark the beginning of a profound transformation, not just for his company, but for his understanding of technology, ethics, and human dignity. The story of Alexander Mitchell and Quantum Vision's algorithm crisis would eventually become required reading in business schools and technology ethics programs worldwide. But for Alexander, it was not an academic case study. It was a deeply personal journey from technological hubris to ethical humility, from blind faith in algorithmic objectivity to a nuanced understanding of how technology can amplify human biases and structural inequities. As he waited for his morning coffee, prepared exactly to his specifications by his efficient assistant Rachel, Alexander reflected on the path that had led to this moment. He had founded Quantum Vision in his early 30s, after a successful career at one of Silicon Valley's tech giants. His vision had been ambitious from the start, to create systems that could process and analyze data in ways that would transform how businesses operated. Under his leadership, Quantum Vision had developed advanced data analytics platforms used by Fortune 500 companies, financial institutions, and government agencies. The company had grown rapidly, acquiring smaller startups and expanding its product offerings. In the process, its workforce had ballooned from a tight-knit team of 20 to over 1,000 employees spread across multiple departments and locations. The rapid growth had created inefficiencies, Alexander believed. There were redundancies, underperformers who slipped through the cracks of traditional performance reviews, talented individuals buried in departments where their skills were underutilized. Project Optimization would solve all of these problems in one fell swoop, using an AI system trained on years of employee data to identify who was truly contributing value and who was not. It was elegant. It was efficient. It was, Alexander thought, entirely objective. As the elevator ascended to the executive floor, he scrolled through the latest metrics on his smartphone. Quantum Vision stock had risen 3% in pre-market trading on rumors of the coming restructuring. The Algorithmic system, developed by Dr. Olivia Coleman's team, had successfully completed all its test runs. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Alexander had always believed in the power of technology to solve human problems. He had built his career and his company on that belief. Project Optimization was the logical extension of that philosophy, using advanced AI to solve the inherently messy, subjective problem of evaluating human performance. What Alexander couldn't yet see, as he stepped out of the elevator to be greeted by his waiting assistant, was that this deep faith in technological solutions was about to be profoundly challenged. The events set in motion that day would force him to confront questions that had never occurred to him to ask. What values and assumptions are encoded in our supposedly objective systems? Whose perspectives shape the data on which our algorithms are trained? And most fundamentally, what decisions should never be delegated to algorithms, no matter how sophisticated? These were not questions that came naturally to Alexander Mitchell, the confident, data-driven CEO. They would emerge painfully, through a crisis that would shake his company to its foundations and force him to reconsider everything he thought he knew about technology, leadership, and human dignity. In the exclusive elevator that took him directly to the executive floor, Alexander mentally reviewed the day's agenda. Today was a special day. They would finally implement Project Optimization, an ambitious plan to restructure the company using an artificial intelligence system developed by their own innovation department. As the elevator doors opened, his personal assistant, Rachel Turner, was waiting for him with coffee prepared exactly as he liked it. Americano with a splash of oat milk, no sugar, served at exactly 145 degrees Fahrenheit. At 32, Rachel was an efficient professional whose discretion and ability to anticipate Alexander's needs had made her an indispensable asset. "Good morning, Mr. Mitchell," she greeted professionally, while handing him the coffee and a tablet with the detailed agenda for the day. "The Human Resources team and the legal department are ready for the meeting about project optimization. The conference room is prepared with all the equipment necessary for the presentation." Alexander took the coffee and the tablet, quickly reviewing the main points. "And Dr. Coleman, has she arrived yet?" "Dr. Coleman arrived half an hour ago," Rachel replied, referring to the Director of Technological Innovation and Principal Developer of the AI system. "She's performing the final checks on the algorithm." "Perfect," nodded Alexander. "And the updated figures for the staff?" "On your tablet, sir. Currently, Quantum Vision has 1,243 employees in the United States, distributed across the departments you can see in the graph." Alexander took a quick look at the numbers. The company had grown too rapidly in recent years, driven by several rounds of funding and the acquisition of smaller startups. That had created redundancies, inefficiencies, and a complex organizational structure that, according to him, hindered the agility needed to continue innovating at the pace demanded by the market. "Good," he finally said. "Let's get to it." As he walked toward the conference room, Alexander felt a mixture of enthusiasm and tension. Project optimization represented a milestone in the application of artificial intelligence to business management. For the first time, decisions about restructuring and layoffs would not be based on subjective impressions from department directors, but on an objective algorithmic analysis of productivity, efficiency, and value contributed to the company. At least that was the theory. The conference room was occupied by a select group of high-level executives. Julia Martinez, the Human Resources Director, a woman in her 50s with decades of experience in personnel management. David Thompson, Legal Director, always cautious and prepared to anticipate potential problems. Dr. Olivia Coleman, the brilliant developer of the algorithm, a 38-year-old woman with a PhD in artificial intelligence from MIT and an impressive track record in Silicon Valley. Also present were Michael Roberts, Financial Director, and James Wilson, Operations Director. All had been preparing for weeks for this day, analyzing data, reviewing contracts, and preparing the logistics for what was coming, a significant reduction in staff determined by artificial intelligence. "Good morning, everyone," greeted Alexander, taking a seat at the head of the table. "Today is an important day for Quantum Vision. We are about to take a revolutionary step in business management." Dr. Olivia Coleman, a woman with defined features, short hair, and an intense gaze, nodded. "The algorithm is ready, Alexander. We've conducted all the necessary tests and simulations. It works exactly as expected." Alexander smiled with satisfaction. "Explain once more how it works, Olivia. I want everyone to perfectly understand the process before we implement it." Olivia activated the main screen of the room, where a complex visualization of the algorithm appeared. "Basically, we've fed the system with all available data about our employees, performance evaluations, contributions to projects, hours worked, client interaction, efficiency, salaries, seniority, practically everything that can be measured." She manipulated the visualization, showing different layers of the analysis. The algorithm processes this data through multiple layers of analysis to determine the objective value that each employee brings to the company. There is no human intervention in this process, which eliminates personal biases and office politics that often contaminate traditional restructuring decisions. David Thompson, the legal director, leaned forward with a concerned expression. "Are we completely sure that the algorithm contains no biases? The legal implications could be severe if any discriminatory pattern were detected." Olivia responded with confidence. "We've taken all possible precautions to eliminate biases. The algorithm does not consider factors such as gender, age, race, or any other protected characteristic. It only analyzes objective performance data." Julia Martinez, the HR director, didn't seem completely convinced. "In theory, it sounds perfect, but my experience tells me that supposedly objective data can contain inherent biases. Performance evaluations, for example, are not immune to evaluators' prejudices. Precisely why this system is revolutionary, Julia, Alexander intervened enthusiastically. The algorithm can detect and correct those biases by cross-referencing multiple data sources. It doesn't rely solely on evaluations, but on concrete and measurable metrics. Michael Roberts, always focused on numbers, asked what everyone was thinking. How many positions does the algorithm identify as redundant or insufficiently productive? Olivia exchanged a glance with Alexander before responding. According to our analysis, quantum vision could operate with optimal efficiency by reducing the staff by approximately 27%. A tense silence fell over the room. We're talking about more than 330 people, commented Julia, visibly uncomfortable. 340 to be exact, confirmed Olivia. The algorithm has identified these positions as those that provide the least relative value to the company in terms of their cost. James Wilson, who had remained silent, finally spoke. And how do we plan to manage a staff reduction of this magnitude? The operational impact will be significant. Alexander took control of the conversation. We've already developed a detailed plan. The layoffs will be carried out in 3 phases over the next 2 weeks, starting today with notification to the first 120 employees. The algorithm has even designed the optimal sequence to minimize operational disruption. Julia Martinez seemed increasingly concerned. Alexander, I know we've discussed this before, but I still have reservations. We're talking about real people with families, mortgages, lives that depend on these jobs. Do we really want to delegate such a human decision to an algorithm? I understand your concern, Julia, Alexander responded with a conciliatory but firm tone. But precisely because these are decisions that affect real people, we must ensure they're as objective as possible. Traditional methods are full of favoritism, internal politics and unconscious biases. This system eliminates that. David Thompson, always cautious from his legal position, insisted, "Can we manually review the list before proceeding? As an additional safety measure?" Olivia shook her head. "That would defeat the purpose of the system, David. The moment we intervene manually, we reintroduce the human biases we're trying to eliminate." "Exactly," agreed Alexander. "We trust technology for so many critical decisions. It's time to take that trust to the next level. This is the future of business management." After almost an hour more of discussion, addressing practical, legal, and logistical aspects, Alexander concluded the meeting with a firm decision. Project optimization would be implemented as planned, starting that very afternoon with the first phase of layoff notifications. As the executives left the room, Julia Martinez stayed behind, waiting to speak with Alexander privately. "Alexander," she began once they were alone, "you know I respect your vision and leadership. You've taken quantum vision to heights many thought impossible, but this concerns me deeply." Alexander sighed. He appreciated Julia, one of the few people in the company who dared to question him directly. "Julia, I understand your reservations, really, but this decision isn't a technological whim. It's a necessity for the long-term survival of the company." "I don't question the need to optimize," she responded. "I question the method. Delegating something as profoundly human as deciding who loses their livelihood to an algorithm, however sophisticated it may be, seems cold." "Sometimes coldness is exactly what's needed," argued Alexander. "Emotions cloud judgment. And honestly, would you prefer to personally decide who goes and who stays?" Julia maintained her gaze. "At least I could explain my reasons, look them in the eye, offer them a justification they understand. An algorithm can't do that." Alexander placed a hand on Julia's shoulder. "That's why we have you. The algorithm makes the decision. You provide the human touch in implementation. It's the perfect balance." Julia didn't seem convinced, but nodded resignedly. "I hope you know what you're doing, Alexander." "I always do," he responded with a confident smile. "That's why I'm where I am." That afternoon, Quantum Vision's Human Resources Department became the epicenter of a storm. Julia Martinez and her team began sending notifications to the first 120 employees identified by the algorithm for the first phase of layoffs. The procedure was clinical in its efficiency. Each employee received an email requesting their immediate presence in one of the meeting rooms designated for this purpose. There, a member of the HR team, accompanied by a legal representative, handed them a termination letter, explained their severance conditions and asked them to surrender their company credentials and leave the building, escorted by security personnel. Reactions varied from silent disbelief to open tears and occasional outbursts of anger. By mid-afternoon, Quantum Vision's hallways were charged with tension. Employees who had not yet been called watched anxiously as each notification arrived in their inboxes, fearing they would be next. In his office, Alexander deliberately kept himself away from the chaos. He had decided not to directly participate in the notifications, considering that his presence would only intensify emotions. Instead, he focused on a presentation for the board of directors, explaining how project optimization would position Quantum Vision as a pioneer in the application of AI to business management. However, his concentration was interrupted when Rachel entered hurriedly, something very unusual for his always composed assistant. "Alexander, I think we have a problem," she said, using his first name, something she only did in truly urgent situations. Alexander looked up from his computer. "What's happening?" "Julia has noticed something concerning in the layoff list," explained Rachel. "She wants to speak with you immediately." "Can't it wait? I'm in the middle of—" "No, it can't wait," interrupted Rachel, underlining the gravity of the situation with this unusual act of assertiveness. "You really need to see this right now." Intrigued and slightly irritated, Alexander got up and followed Rachel to Julia Martinez's office. The HR director was sitting in front of her computer, with a grave expression. Beside her, Dr. Olivia Coleman seemed visibly disturbed, something completely out of character for the normally serene scientist. "What's happening?" asked Alexander, closing the door behind him. Julia turned her monitor so Alexander could see the screen. "I've been reviewing the data from the first 120 layoffs, and I've noticed something that can't be a coincidence." On the screen was a demographic analysis of the employees laid off in the first phase. "Of the 120 employees notified so far, 78 are women," pointed out Julia. "And of those 78 women, 63 are from ethnic minorities, mainly Black and Latina women." Alexander frowned, processing the information. "Are you sure about these numbers?" "Absolutely," confirmed Julia. "I've verified them 3 times. Almost 53% of the Black women in the entire company are on this first layoff list. That can't be a statistical coincidence." Olivia, who had been unusually silent, finally spoke. "I've been analyzing the algorithm since Julia showed me this data. There's something I don't understand. The system was specifically designed to ignore factors like gender and race." "Obviously, something has failed," responded Alexander, the tension evident in his voice. "How could this happen?" Olivia shook her head, visibly frustrated. "I'm trying to figure it out. The algorithm is extremely complex, with multiple layers of deep learning. It's not as simple as looking for a problematic line of code." "This is exactly what I feared," said Julia, with an accusatory tone. "Algorithms aren't neutral. They reflect and amplify the biases present in the data they're trained with." "The data we used was objective," Olivia defended herself. "Performance evaluations, productivity metrics, contributions to projects." "And who conducts those evaluations?" responded Julia. "Who defines which metrics are important? Who decides which contributions are valuable?" "Humans, Olivia. Humans with their own unconscious biases." Alexander interrupted the exchange, aware of the gravity of the situation. "We need to stop the notifications immediately. David needs to see this before we proceed further." "I've already called him," informed Julia. "He's on his way. But Alexander, we've already notified 120 people. We can't simply tell them sorry, it was a mistake." Alexander ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that betrayed his growing stress. "Does anyone outside this room know this data?" Julia hesitated before responding. "My team has noticed the pattern. They're HR professionals. They're trained to detect these kinds of things. And the employees, people aren't stupid, Alexander. They're seeing who's being escorted out of the building." As if to underline her words, Julia's phone rang. After a brief conversation, her expression became even more grave. "Jessica from Communications," she reported upon hanging up. "She says several journalists have started calling. It seems someone has leaked information about the layoffs and the demographic pattern." Alexander momentarily closed his eyes, visualizing the media disaster that was approaching. "How much time do we have before this becomes a national story?" "Hours at most," estimated Julia. "Social media is already starting to boil with comments from employees." At that moment, David Thompson, the legal director, hurriedly entered the office. I just saw the data. This is a potential disaster of epic proportions. Algorithmic discrimination. We're looking at class action lawsuits, government investigations, not to mention the reputational damage. We need a strategy, said Alexander, recovering some of his usual authority. Olivia, I want you to dedicate all necessary resources to understanding exactly what happened with that algorithm. David, prepare a legal response. And Julia, I'm already on it, responded Julia before he could finish. We're preparing a statement for all employees and studying how to handle the notifications already made. Alexander nodded. Good. Let's meet in an hour with a complete action plan. As everyone quickly left to fulfill their tasks, Alexander remained alone in Julia's office, contemplating how his innovative vision had transformed into a nightmare in a matter of hours. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of crisis for quantum vision. The news spread like wildfire. Tech company uses AI to selectively fire black women, the newspapers headlined. Social media erupted with hashtags like racist quantum vision and discriminatory algorithms. Civil rights groups and feminist organizations issued statements condemning the company. Former employees appeared on television, telling their experiences. In the midst of the storm, Dr. Olivia Coleman worked tirelessly with her team to understand what had gone so catastrophically wrong with the algorithm. After almost 30 hours without sleep, she finally found the answer. It's more complicated and yet simpler than we thought, she explained to Alexander, Julia, and David in an emergency meeting. The algorithm was indeed designed to ignore factors like gender and race, but by analyzing patterns in the historical data of evaluation and promotion, it indirectly learned to replicate existing biases. What does that mean exactly? Asked David. Olivia displayed a series of graphs on the screen. It means that our algorithm detected that historically, certain groups, particularly black women, have consistently received lower evaluations, have been promoted less frequently, and have been assigned to less visible projects. You're confirming that there has been systematic discrimination at Quantum Vision, said Julia, her tone a mixture of vindication and concern. Not necessarily deliberate, qualified Olivia, but yes, the data shows patterns consistent with structural biases, and the algorithm in its search for efficiency interpreted them as indicators of lesser value to the company. Alexander, who had been unusually silent, finally spoke. In other words, our objective algorithm learned to be racist and sexist because we unconsciously have been. That's a simplification but essentially correct, confirmed Olivia. In technical terms, it's a classic case of garbage in, garbage out. The algorithm could only work with the data we provided, and that data contained implicit biases that we ourselves hadn't identified. David Thompson, always thinking of the legal implications, intervened. This complicates our defense. We can't simply blame the technology when the problem seems to be rooted in our own practices. It's not just about legal defense now, responded Alexander, standing and walking to the window. It's about doing the right thing. And I think we all know what the first step is. The three looked at him expectantly. We're going to reinstate all laid-off employees, declared Alexander, immediately and with a public apology. The surprise was evident on everyone's faces. Alexander Mitchell, known for his determination and for never backing down, was admitting a colossal error. It's the right thing to do, supported Julia, visibly relieved. But it will only be the first step of many needed to repair the damage. I know, nodded Alexander. We need a complete external audit of our hiring, evaluation, and promotion practices, and we need to be completely transparent about what we've discovered and how we plan to fix it. David, always cautious, warned, that level of transparency could increase our legal exposure. Perhaps, acknowledged Alexander, but trying to cover this up would only make it worse. And honestly, if we've been operating with systematic biases, we need to face it and correct it regardless of the short-term legal consequences. Olivia, who had remained thoughtful, finally spoke. There's something else we should consider. This case has implications that go far beyond quantum vision. We're seeing how AI can amplify and systematize human biases in ways we didn't even anticipate. We could contribute significantly to the field if we shared our findings. Alexander looked at her with renewed respect. Despite the fact that the algorithm's failure could be considered a devastating blow to her professional reputation, Olivia was thinking of the greater good. You're right, he agreed. We'll prepare a detailed technical report on what happened for the scientific community. No omissions, no softening of the errors. With an initial plan established, the executive team got to work. Alexander prepared a public statement admitting the error and announcing the immediate reinstatement of all laid-off employees. Julia and her team began personally contacting each affected person. David prepared an additional compensation package as recognition for the trauma caused, and Olivia initiated a thorough review of the failed algorithm, meticulously documenting every step of the process. However, the story was far from over. For many of the affected employees, the wound was too deep to heal with a simple apology and reinstatement. Zoe Washington, a 34-year-old software engineer with 5 years at the company, was one of the first to be laid off, and now found herself in the difficult position of deciding whether to accept the offer of reinstatement. "I don't know if I can go back to a place where an algorithm classified me as disposable," she explained to Julia during their call. "And worse yet, an algorithm that apparently considered my gender and race as relevant factors for that decision." Julia, who had had dozens of similar conversations in recent days, responded with honesty. "I completely understand your position, Zoe. What happened is inexcusable. I can only tell you that we are genuinely committed to correcting the systemic problems that allowed this to happen." "Words," responded Zoe with skepticism. "I've heard many words about diversity and inclusion over the years. What I've never seen are real structural changes. This time will be different," promised Julia. "The shock of what happened has been a catalyst for a fundamental rethinking. We've already hired external auditors to review all our policies and practices, and an ethics committee is being formed to oversee any future use of AI in decisions that affect people." There was a long silence on the line before Zoe responded. "I need time to think about it. This experience has been traumatic." "Of course," responded Julia. "Take all the time you need. Your position will be waiting for you if you decide to come back." Similar conversations were repeated throughout the day with mixed results. Some employees, motivated by economic needs or genuine attachment to the company beyond this incident, accepted returning. Others firmly rejected the offer, having lost all trust in Quantum Vision as an employer. Many, like Zoe, asked for time to reflect. Meanwhile, Alexander faced his own crisis of confidence. The man who had always been so sure of his vision, of his ability to lead technological innovation, now fundamentally questioned his basic assumptions about the objectivity of data and the neutrality of technology. A week after the initial disaster, Alexander convened a general company meeting. For the first time since the founding of Quantum Vision, all employees, including those in the process of deciding about their reinstatement, were invited to participate, either in person or via video conference. The main auditorium of the headquarters was full, with hundreds of additional employees connected remotely. The tension was palpable as Alexander took the stage, notably without his usual multimedia presentation or characteristic charismatic enthusiasm. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, his voice graver than normal. "The last few days have been the most difficult in the history of our company, but more importantly, they have been devastating for many of you on a personal level, especially for those who were unfairly selected by a system that I authorized and implemented." He paused, looking directly at the audience. "I want to begin with an unequivocal apology. What happened was a catastrophic failure, not just at a technological level, but at a human and ethical level, and the final responsibility is completely mine." Absolute silence dominated the room as Alexander continued. "For years, I've promoted the vision that technology can eliminate human biases, that algorithms can be fairer than people. Now I face the harsh reality that technology, when built upon data and systems contaminated by historical prejudices, not only replicates those biases, but can amplify and systematize them. Preliminary analyses confirm what many of you already suspected. Our algorithm learned to discriminate based on pre-existing patterns in our historical data. In other words, the system reflected and magnified biases that already existed within our organization." A murmur ran through the audience. For many employees, especially those belonging to minority groups, this confirmation of their suspicions and lived experiences was both vindicating and deeply disturbing. "But I'm not here just to offer apologies or explanations," continued Alexander. "I'm here to share concrete actions. Starting today, we'll implement a comprehensive plan to address not just the technological failure, but the deeper problems it revealed. He proceeded to detail a series of initiatives, a thorough external audit of all hiring, evaluation, and promotion practices, the creation of an ethics committee with broad representation from throughout the company, mandatory training programs on unconscious bias for all employees, starting with the management team, complete review of all algorithmic systems used in the company, and the hiring of a director of diversity and inclusion with extensive experience and real authority. Additionally, added Alexander, we recognize that for many of you, especially those who were unfairly selected for layoff, these measures may not be sufficient to restore trust. That's why we're implementing a special compensation program for all those affected, regardless of whether they decide to return to quantum vision or not. As he detailed the compensation program, Alexander noticed a hand rising firmly in the third row. It was Zoe Washington. "Yes, Zoe," he said, interrupting his presentation. "Please." Zoe stood up, her posture firm and her voice clear as she spoke. "I appreciate the apologies and plans, Alexander, really, but there's something fundamentally disturbing about all this that you still haven't addressed." "What is it?" asked Alexander, genuinely interested. "The fact that you were willing to delegate decisions about people's livelihoods to an algorithm in the first place," responded Zoe. "Regardless of whether that algorithm was biased or not, what does it say about our culture that we considered it acceptable to reduce human value to metrics and let a machine decide who stayed and who left?" A heavy silence fell over the room as Zoe's words resonated. Alexander remained silent for several seconds, visibly processing the question. "It's a deeply valid observation," he finally responded, "and I believe it points to something more fundamental than technical biases. It points to a disconnection between our stated values and our actions. We've talked about valuing people, about being a community, while simultaneously we were willing to apply a completely dehumanizing approach to decisions that affect lives." Alexander left the podium and walked to the edge of the stage, getting closer to the audience. "This goes beyond a technical failure. It's a moral and philosophical failure. And it requires not just technical and policy corrections, but a fundamental rethinking of our culture and values." Looking directly at Zoe, he added, "I don't have a complete answer today, but I promise you, I promise all of you, that your question will be at the center of our transformation process. Because you're right, no matter how fair an algorithm might be, there are decisions that should never be delegated to machines." The meeting continued with an unprecedented question and answer session, where employees from all levels openly shared their experiences, concerns, and suggestions. For many observers, it was the first time they saw Alexander Mitchell truly listening, without interrupting, without defending, simply absorbing the diverse perspectives of his workforce. In the weeks and months that followed, Quantum Vision began the painful but necessary work of transformation. The external audit revealed patterns of systemic bias that went far beyond the failed algorithm. Women, especially women of color, consistently received lower evaluations for identical behaviors to their male colleagues. Employees of certain ethnic backgrounds were assigned less frequently to high-profile projects, and promotions followed patterns that couldn't be explained solely by merit or performance. The audit report, which Alexander decided to make public in an unprecedented act of corporate transparency, shook not just Quantum Vision, but the entire American tech industry. Other companies began examining their own practices, fearing similar biases would be discovered. Dr. Olivia Coleman, meanwhile, published a detailed technical analysis of the failed algorithm, which quickly became a crucial case study in the emerging field of AI ethics. Her work, far from damaging her reputation, established her as a leading voice in the identification and mitigation of algorithmic biases. For Julia Martinez, the crisis validated concerns she had expressed for years about the need for a more human approach to personnel management. With Alexander's full backing, she implemented a series of radical reforms in the company's human resources practices. And for Zoe Washington, who finally decided to return to Quantum Vision, the experience catapulted her into an unexpected role. Recognizing her insight and courage in publicly questioning the ethical foundations of corporate decisions, Alexander invited her to co-lead the company's new ethics committee, with real authority to oversee and veto projects with questionable ethical implications. 6 months after the disastrous project optimization, Alexander Mitchell found himself on stage again, this time at a major international technology conference. The topic of his talk, significantly different from his usual presentations on innovation and disruption, was algorithmic humility, lessons from an ethical failure. The promise of artificial intelligence is seductive, he began. It offers us the illusion of objectivity, of decisions free from human prejudices and limitations. But what we discovered in the most painful way possible is that our AI systems are mirrors of ourselves, with all our imperfections and biases amplified and systematized. Before an audience that included some of the most influential leaders in the tech sector, Alexander shared without reservation the complete story of Quantum Vision's failure and the hard lessons learned. The deepest question we face is not technical, but ethical, he continued. It's not just how do we build fairer AI systems, but what decisions should we delegate to these systems in the first place? There are domains where algorithms can outperform humans in efficiency and consistency, but there are others, especially those that profoundly affect human lives and dignity, where no algorithm, however sophisticated, should replace human judgment, empathy, and responsibility. As he concluded his presentation, Alexander projected an image that surprised many in the audience, a photograph of Quantum Vision's newly expanded management team, notably more diverse than 6 months earlier. This is perhaps the most visible change at Quantum Vision since our crisis, he explained. But the deeper changes have been in our culture, in how we value different types of contributions, in how we listen to diverse voices, and in how we understand the ethical responsibility of the technology we create. The irony doesn't escape me, he added with a reflective smile. We tried to use AI to optimize our workforce, and the result was revealing how deeply suboptimal our culture was. Seeking algorithmic efficiency, we discovered our own human inefficiency in recognizing and valuing the full spectrum of human talent. He ended with a reflection that resonated deeply with those present. The true promise of artificial intelligence is not in replacing human judgment, but in helping us recognize its limitations, not in eliminating human responsibility, but in deepening it, not in making our biases more efficient, but in helping us see them more clearly, so we can begin the difficult work of overcoming them. The audience rose in a standing ovation that surprised Alexander himself. Among the most enthusiastic applause were those from a group of Quantum Vision employees seated in the front row, including Zoe Washington, Olivia Coleman, and Julia Martinez. Their faces reflected not just approval, but a shared recognition of the painful but necessary journey they had undertaken together. After the conference, while Alexander shared coffee with his team, Zoe expressed what many were thinking. When all this started, I never imagined we would be here 6 months later being references in technological ethics. From crisis to opportunity, reflected Julia, although I wish we had learned these lessons in a less traumatic way. The real test lies ahead, pragmatically warned Olivia. Maintaining this commitment when competitive and financial pressure returns, as it inevitably will. Alexander nodded, acknowledging the validity of the concern. That's why we need to institutionalize these changes. They can't depend on my personal conversion or our current collective remorse. They have to be integrated into our policies, processes, and most importantly, our culture. And we need to share what we've learned, added Zoe. Other companies are making the same mistakes right now, perhaps in less dramatic ways, but equally harmful. That will be our next project, agreed Alexander. Not just fixing Quantum Vision, but contributing to a broader change in the industry. Upon returning to San Francisco, Alexander found a company transformed not only in composition, but in spirit. The hallways, once silent due to individual concentration, now buzzed with animated conversations between diverse teams. The meetings, previously dominated by a few voices, now deliberately included varied perspectives. And AI projects, far from being abandoned, were now subjected to rigorous ethical analyses before implementation. A year after the disastrous project optimization, Quantum Vision launched its most ambitious initiative to date, a set of open-source tools and methodologies to detect and mitigate algorithmic biases, developed in collaboration with academic researchers and other technology companies. In the presentation of this initiative, Alexander shared reflections that summarized the company's extraordinary journey. A year ago, we believed we could use artificial intelligence to optimize our organization. What we didn't understand then, but clearly comprehend now, is that no algorithm can optimize what we don't value correctly in the first place. Our failure wasn't primarily technological, but human. We didn't recognize the value of diversity. We didn't listen to voices that warned us. We didn't question our basic assumptions. The algorithm simply magnified and systematized those human flaws. Today, we don't claim to have all the answers. In fact, one of our most important lessons has been the virtue of technological humility, recognizing the limits of what our systems can and should do, and the need to always keep human responsibility at the center. Looking at the diverse audience before him, Alexander concluded, "The true innovation we need is not just technical but ethical, not just in what our algorithms can do, but in how we decide to use them. Not just in the efficiency of our systems, but in the fairness and humanity of our decisions." Among the attendees, Zoe Washington, now director of the new Department of Technological Ethics at Quantum Vision, smiled. Her painful experience had catalyzed a transformation that, though born of traumatic circumstances, was now generating positive changes that extended far beyond a single company. The path had not been easy. Many wounds took time to heal, and some never would completely. Several employees understandably never returned, choosing to rebuild their careers elsewhere. The legal and regulatory repercussions continued for months, and the temptation to return to old habits under financial pressure was a constant struggle. But at the core of Quantum Vision, something new and valuable had emerged, a deeper understanding of ethical responsibility in the digital age, a commitment to genuine inclusion that went beyond rhetoric, and a leadership model that valued humility and continuous learning above arrogant certainty. For Alexander Mitchell, the greatest change had been personal. The confident technological visionary, who once believed that algorithms could solve any problem, had been replaced by a more reflective leader, who understood that the most powerful tools remain imperfect extensions of their human creators, with all their strengths and weaknesses. As he commented to a journalist who asked about his transformation, "I believed I was delegating difficult decisions to an objective system. What I didn't understand is that I was delegating moral responsibility, something no leader should ever do. That lesson cost a high price for many people, and it's a debt I can never fully repay. But I can ensure that their suffering wasn't in vain, that the lessons endure and that the change they catalyzed continues." As Quantum Vision moved toward its redefined future, the story of its failure and transformation became mandatory case study material in business schools and technological ethics programs around the world. A painful but powerful warning of how technology can amplify our worst impulses, but also a hopeful story of how honest recognition of failure can catalyze authentic and lasting change. And for the 340 women, predominantly of color, whose lives had been disrupted by a biased algorithm, there remained the vindication that their collective experience had helped expose and begin to dismantle patterns of discrimination that otherwise might have remained invisible for years. As Zoe Washington reflected on the first anniversary of the incident, "I can't say I'm glad about what happened. The trauma was real and lasting, but I can say I'm proud of what we've built since then. We transformed a crisis into a catalyst, a failure into a foundation for something better. And perhaps that's the most important lesson. Our most painful mistakes, when faced with honesty and courage, can become our most valuable contributions." 18 months after the algorithm crisis, Quantum Vision faced a new challenge, but this time from a position of strength built on its painful lessons. The tech industry had entered a competitive downturn, with venture capital drying up and many companies implementing aggressive cost-cutting measures. Shareholders and some board members were pressuring Alexander to consider another round of layoffs. "The market expectations are clear," said Robert Davidson, one of the most influential board members, during a tense strategy meeting. "Our competitors are cutting staff by 15–20%. If we don't show similar cost discipline, our stock will continue to suffer." Alexander looked around the conference table at his expanded leadership team. The faces staring back at him were noticeably more diverse than they had been 2 years earlier. More importantly, the perspectives they represented had fundamentally changed how decisions were made at Quantum Vision. "I understand the pressure, Robert," Alexander replied carefully, "but I think we've earned the right to take a different approach based on what we've learned." Julia Martinez, still heading HR but now with expanded authority as Chief People Officer, nodded in agreement. "We've actually been working on an alternative cost reduction strategy that doesn't involve mass layoffs. We believe it's not only more humane, but potentially more effective long-term. "I'd like to hear it," said Robert skeptically. Julia opened a presentation that detailed a multifaceted approach: voluntary reduced hours with proportional salary adjustments, temporary executive pay cuts, starting with Alexander himself, pausing certain expansion projects, renegotiating vendor contracts, and a company-wide cost-saving initiative that invited employees at all levels to identify inefficiencies. Our preliminary analysis suggests this approach could achieve 80% of the cost savings of layoffs, while preserving our talent pool and the culture we've worked so hard to rebuild, Julia explained. "And what about the other 20%? Pressed Robert. Alexander leaned forward. "We're prepared to accept slightly lower margins in the short term to maintain our human capital for the long term. The real question is, are we willing to sacrifice everything we've learned and built since the algorithm crisis for a temporary stock boost?" Zoe Washington, now fully established in her role as ethics director, added, "We should also consider the reputational value we've built as a leader in ethical business practices. That's worth something on the balance sheet too, even if it's harder to quantify." The discussion continued for hours, with data and perspectives being shared from all sides. Unlike the meeting that had launched Project Optimization 18 months earlier, this one featured robust debate, challenging questions, and a genuine weighing of human impacts alongside financial considerations. In the end, the board agreed to give Alexander's team 6 months to implement their alternative strategy, with specific benchmarks for cost savings and operational efficiency. If those benchmarks weren't met, more drastic measures would be reconsidered. The next day, Alexander stood before the company again, this time with a very different announcement than many employees had feared. "The easy path would be to follow our competitors into layoffs," he told them, "but we're choosing the harder path, one that reflects what we've learned about valuing people as more than just numbers on a spreadsheet." He outlined the voluntary measures and cost-saving initiatives, emphasizing that employees at all levels would share in both the sacrifices and the decision-making. "I can't promise this will be easy," he concluded, "but I can promise that we'll face these challenges together, with transparency and a commitment to the values that now define us." The response was overwhelming. Within 2 weeks, over 30% of employees had volunteered for reduced hours, far exceeding expectations. The cost-saving initiative generated hundreds of actionable ideas, many from frontline employees who had never been asked for their input before. 6 months later, Quantum Vision had not only met, but exceeded its financial targets, all without a single involuntary layoff. The approach generated new case studies and articles in business publications, further cementing the company's reputation as a pioneer in ethical business practices. At the anniversary staff meeting, celebrating 2 years since the turning point of the algorithm crisis, Alexander shared a reflection that captured their collective journey. "The true measure of our transformation isn't what we say about our values, it's how we act when those values are tested. 2 years ago, we learned the hard way that an algorithm is only as ethical as the humans who create it. Today, we've learned that a company is only as ethical as the decisions it makes when facing difficult choices." He paused, looking out at the faces of people who had gone through fire together and emerged stronger. "The algorithm crisis taught us that we can't delegate our moral responsibility to technology. The financial challenges of this past year taught us that we can't delegate it to market pressures either. In both cases, the lesson is the same. Our humanity is revealed not in how we optimize, but in how we prioritize." In the audience, Zoe Washington sat next to several colleagues who, like her, had almost been algorithmic casualties 2 years earlier. As she looked around at the company that had almost discarded them and now celebrated their contributions, she felt something that had been in short supply in the tech industry: hope that technology and humanity could progress together, not at each other's expense. The story of Quantum Vision's transformation continued to spread, becoming required reading in business ethics courses and inspiring other companies to reconsider their own practices. The Quantum Vision model became shorthand for a more humane approach to both technology development and corporate leadership. And for Alexander Mitchell, who had once believed that algorithms could make better decisions than humans, the greatest lesson had been personal. Technology at its best doesn't replace human judgment, but enhances it, doesn't simplify ethical complexity, but helps us navigate it with greater awareness of our responsibilities to each other. As he often concluded his increasingly sought-after talks on ethical leadership, in the digital age. The most dangerous algorithm isn't the one that fails catastrophically. It's the one that succeeds in doing exactly what we asked, without our realizing that we were asking for the wrong thing. Our greatest responsibility isn't debugging our code, but examining our values. Have you ever blindly trusted technology without questioning the values and biases that might be hidden within it? Have you delegated important decisions to automated systems without considering the human consequences? This story reminds us that even seemingly objective tools reflect our own prejudices, and that true ethical responsibility can never be delegated to an algorithm. 3 years after the algorithm crisis that transformed quantum vision and its leadership, Alexander found himself addressing a crowd very different from the tech conferences that had been his usual forum. He stood in a university auditorium, speaking to graduate students in a new interdisciplinary program, combining computer science, ethics, sociology, and law, a program that had been partly inspired by the case study of quantum vision's algorithm failure. When we created that algorithm, Alexander explained, we thought we were eliminating human bias. What we didn't understand was that we were actually encoding it, amplifying it, and giving it the veneer of mathematical objectivity. A student raised her hand. But couldn't a better algorithm solve that problem? One with more sophisticated bias detection? Alexander smiled. It was the same question he would have asked 3 years earlier. That's the technological solutionist mindset that I used to embody, he replied. The belief that for every problem created by technology, there's a technological solution waiting to be discovered. He paused, looking out at the diverse faces of the next generation of technologists. What I've learned is that while better algorithms can certainly help, they can't solve what is fundamentally a human problem. Algorithmic bias isn't a bug. It's a mirror reflecting the structural inequalities and implicit biases in our society and organizations. Technical fixes alone will always fall short if they aren't accompanied by deeper social, cultural, and organizational changes. After his talk, Alexander met with a small group of faculty and graduate students working on a research project to create ethical guidelines for AI deployment in workforce management. Among them was Dr. Rebecca Johnson, a former quantum vision employee who had been laid off by the biased algorithm and had subsequently pursued a PhD focusing on technological ethics. It's still surreal sometimes, she admitted as they discussed the project, to see how that awful experience transformed into something constructive. The framework we're developing here might prevent other companies from making the same mistakes. Alexander nodded, feeling the familiar mixture of regret and purpose that now characterized his relationship with the algorithm crisis. The most valuable lessons are often the most painful to learn. I just wish the cost hadn't been borne disproportionately by people like you. That's why representation matters so much in these discussions, Rebecca responded. The people who experience the harm need to be part of creating the solutions. That evening, Alexander called Zoe Washington, who had recently been promoted to Quantum Vision's executive leadership team as Chief Ethics Officer, a position that hadn't existed before the crisis. How did it go at Stanford? She asked. Productive, Alexander replied. The program they're building there is impressive, exactly the kind of cross-disciplinary approach we need. And I met Rebecca Johnson, who's doing remarkable work. Rebecca from data science, the one who was part of the layoffs? The same, she's turning her experience into systemic change. Zoe was silent for a moment. It's strange, isn't it? How some of the people most hurt by our mistakes have become the most powerful agents for transformation. It's humbling, agreed Alexander, and a reminder of why diverse perspectives are so crucial. If we'd had voices like Rebecca's and yours in the room when project optimization was being planned, we might have avoided the whole disaster, Zoe finished, which is exactly why the work we're doing now matters so much. Back at Quantum Vision headquarters, the company that had once nearly destroyed itself through algorithmic discrimination had become a case study in ethical AI development. The changes weren't just in policies or procedures, but in the fundamental composition and culture of the organization. The technical teams now included ethicists and social scientists working alongside engineers. Regular bias audits were conducted on all systems, with results transparently shared. A reverse mentoring program paired senior executives with employees from underrepresented groups to ensure diverse perspectives influenced decision-making at the highest levels. Perhaps most significantly, Quantum Vision had established a stakeholder council that included not just employees and executives, but also community representatives, ethical AI researchers, and even former employees who had been affected by the biased algorithm. This council had real power to review and, if necessary, halt any project with potential ethical concerns. These changes hadn't been easy or without cost. Some investors had initially balked at what they saw as unnecessary constraints on innovation. Several executives who couldn't adapt to the new approach had left, and the company had deliberately slowed some product launches to ensure proper ethical review, sometimes ceding first-mover advantage to less scrupulous competitors. But the long-term results spoke for themselves. Employee retention had improved dramatically, particularly among women and people of color. The quality of Quantum Vision's products had increased, with fewer post-launch problems or ethical controversies, and somewhat surprisingly to those who had predicted financial doom, the company's stock had outperformed most of its peers over the 3-year period since the crisis. At the company's 4th annual Ethics Summit, where employees from all levels gathered to review and refine Quantum Vision's ethical practices, Alexander found himself in conversation with a new hire, a young engineer who had specifically joined the company because of its commitment to ethical AI. "Before I came here," the engineer told him, "I was working at a startup that was basically doing what you tried to do with project optimization, except they're calling it talent analytics and marketing it to Fortune 500 companies." Alexander frowned. "Are they addressing the bias issues?" The engineer shook his head. "They claim their system is bias-free because it doesn't explicitly consider protected characteristics. Sound familiar?" "All too familiar," Alexander sighed. "It's the same mistake we made. Have you talked to Zoe about this?" "That's why I brought it up with you. I think there's an opportunity here. This startup is getting traction, and if their system is deployed widely, it could impact thousands of people, disproportionately people from marginalized groups." Alexander considered this. "What are you suggesting?" "I think Quantum Vision has a responsibility to share what we've learned more proactively, not just in case studies or conference talks, but by directly engaging with companies developing similar technologies, maybe even developing an open framework for ethical AI deployment that becomes an industry standard." Alexander nodded slowly, ideas forming. "You're right. We've been focused on fixing our own house, but there's a bigger picture here. Let's set up a meeting with Zoe and the ethics team to discuss this." This conversation led to the launch of Quantum Vision's most ambitious initiative yet, the Responsible AI Consortium, a coalition of technology companies, academic institutions, civil rights organizations, and government representatives working together to establish practical, enforceable standards for ethical AI development and deployment. The consortium faced significant challenges from the start. Some companies were hesitant to join, fearing constraints on their autonomy or exposure of problematic practices. Others wanted to participate for the public relations value, but resisted meaningful commitments. At the consortium's first major summit, held at Quantum Vision's headquarters, Alexander found himself defending the initiative against skeptical executives from other tech companies. "You're essentially asking us to slow down innovation and add costs to our development process," argued the CEO of a major competitor. "In this market, that's competitive suicide." Alexander had anticipated this objection. 5 years ago, I would have made exactly the same argument, but I've learned through painful experience that moving fast and breaking things isn't a sustainable approach when what you're breaking is people's lives and livelihoods. He displayed a slide showing Quantum Vision's financial performance against key competitors. Contrary to what I would have expected, our more deliberate ethical approach hasn't hurt us financially. In fact, it's become a competitive advantage. "How so?" asked another skeptical executive. "3 ways, Alexander explained. First, talent. In a tight labor market, the best people want to work for companies that share their values. Our employee retention has increased by 34%, and our recruitment costs have dropped by 28%. He advanced to the next slide. Second, customer trust. As AI becomes more prevalent and powerful, customers are increasingly concerned about how their data is used and the ethics of the systems making decisions about them. Our enterprise clients particularly value our transparent approach to AI development. The final slide showed product quality metrics. And third, better products. By involving diverse perspectives and conducting rigorous ethical reviews, we catch problems earlier in the development cycle when they're cheaper to fix. Our post-launch incidents have decreased by 62%. The presentation sparked a vigorous debate that continued through the day. By the end of the summit, 8 companies had committed to the consortium's initial framework, a modest but encouraging start. As Alexander prepared to leave, he was approached by a journalist who had been covering the event. "You've come a long way from the CEO who thought an algorithm could make better firing decisions than humans," she observed. "What would you say is the most important lesson you've learned?" Alexander considered the question carefully. "I think it's this. Technology is never neutral. It always embodies the values, priorities, and yes, the biases of those who create it. The myth of algorithmic objectivity is just that. A myth. The moment we pretend otherwise, we abdicate our responsibility for the systems we build and their impacts on real people." He paused, then added, "But the corollary is equally important. If technology embodies our values, then we can choose to build technology that embodies our best values: justice, equity, respect for human dignity. That's the work we're trying to do now, imperfect as it may be." The Responsible AI Consortium grew steadily over the next year, eventually encompassing over 40 organizations. Its first major achievement was the development of the Ethical AI Certification, a rigorous standard that companies could apply for to demonstrate their commitment to responsible AI practices. The certification process included independent audits of AI systems for potential biases, reviews of development processes, and assessments of governance structures to ensure appropriate human oversight of algorithmic systems. Importantly, it also required meaningful involvement of diverse stakeholders in AI development and deployment decisions. Quantum Vision was among the first companies to apply for certification, voluntarily subjecting its systems and practices to intense scrutiny. The process revealed several areas for improvement, which the company transparently acknowledged and addressed. On the 5th anniversary of the algorithm crisis, Quantum Vision hosted a special event to mark both the painful history and the progress made since. The company invited many former employees who had been affected by the biased algorithm, including those who had chosen not to return to the company. The event featured panel discussions, workshops, and opportunities for open dialogue about algorithmic bias and corporate responsibility. It was both a commemoration and a recommitment to the values that had emerged from the crisis. During the closing session, Alexander shared the stage with Zoe Washington and several other key figures in the company's transformation. Rather than delivering prepared remarks, they engaged in an honest conversation about the ongoing work of building ethical technology. "One question I still struggle with," Alexander admitted during the discussion, "is how to balance accountability for past mistakes with the need to move forward. We can never fully repair the harm that was done, yet we can't stay frozen in that moment either." Zoe nodded thoughtfully. "I think about this a lot. For me, the key is that moving forward doesn't mean moving on, in the sense of leaving the past behind. It means carrying those lessons with us in everything we do. It means ensuring that the voices of those who were harmed continue to shape our path forward." One of the former employees in the audience raised her hand. "I chose not to come back to Quantum Vision, and I don't regret that decision, but I am genuinely impressed by the changes I've seen from the outside. My question is, how do you ensure these changes outlast the people in this room? What happens when you're gone, Alexander? When Zoe moves on? Will Quantum Vision's commitment to ethical AI persist?" It was the question that kept Alexander awake at night. "That's why institutionalizing these values is so crucial," he responded. "The ethics committee, the stakeholder council, the certification process, these aren't dependent on any individual. But more fundamentally, we've tried to embed these values into the culture itself, into how decisions are made at every level." Zoe added, "And we've tried to make these changes self-reinforcing. The more diverse perspectives we include in decision-making, the more likely we are to catch potential ethical issues early. The more transparent we are about our processes, the more accountable we remain to our values." As the event concluded, Alexander found himself reflecting on how far they had come and how far they still had to go. The algorithm crisis had been a profound failure, one that had caused real harm to real people. Nothing could erase that. But it had also catalyzed a transformation that reached far beyond one company or one incident. The following week, Alexander received an unexpected invitation. The White House was forming a commission on AI governance and wanted him to serve as a member. bringing his unique perspective as someone who had experienced firsthand the consequences of inadequate ethical oversight of AI systems. The commission would bring together technology leaders, civil rights advocates, labor representatives and academic experts to develop recommendations for regulatory frameworks that would promote innovation while protecting against algorithmic harm. As Alexander considered the invitation, he reflected on his journey from technological optimist to ethical advocate. He thought about all the people who had been part of that journey: Zoe, Olivia, Julia, the employees who had been harmed by the algorithm but had transformed that harm into positive change. He thought about the responsibility that came with the platform he now had, the obligation to ensure that other companies wouldn't have to learn the same lessons through the same painful mistakes. And he thought about the broader societal challenges posed by increasingly powerful AI systems, challenges that went far beyond one company's hiring practices or one flawed algorithm. Alexander accepted the invitation, recognizing that the work of creating ethical technology was much bigger than any one company or individual. It was a collective responsibility, one that required ongoing vigilance, humility, and a willingness to prioritize human well-being over technological progress for its own sake. The story of Quantum Vision's algorithm crisis and transformation didn't end with neat resolution. It continued to unfold with ongoing struggles, new challenges, and imperfect solutions. But at its core was a fundamental shift in understanding, a recognition that technology doesn't exist in a vacuum, separate from the social contexts in which it operates. As Alexander prepared for his first commission meeting, he found himself returning to the simple but profound insight that had emerged from the crisis. Behind every algorithm is a set of human choices about what to optimize for, whose interests to prioritize, which factors to consider, and which to ignore. Making those choices wisely and ethically requires more than technical expertise. It requires diverse perspectives, critical examination of assumptions, and a deep commitment to human dignity and justice. In the end, the lesson of Quantum Vision's journey wasn't that algorithms are inherently flawed or that AI is too dangerous to deploy. Rather, it was that creating ethical technology requires putting humans, in all their complexity and diversity, at the center of both the development process and the ultimate purpose of the technology itself. Technology, at its best, should expand human potential and possibility. It should serve human flourishing, not narrow economic or efficiency metrics, and it should be guided by the wisdom, judgment, and moral responsibility that no algorithm, however sophisticated, can replace. That was the vision that had emerged from Quantum Vision's painful reckoning with algorithmic bias, a vision that continued to guide the company and, increasingly, the broader technology industry as it navigated the profound ethical challenges of the AI age. If you liked this story, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for more content that will make you reflect on the ethical dilemmas we face in our increasingly digitized era. And remember, the most sophisticated technology remains an extension of humanity, with all our virtues and flaws. Epilogue. 15 years later, 15 years after the algorithm crisis that had transformed Quantum Vision and reshaped Alexander Mitchell's understanding of technology and ethics, he found himself sitting in a quiet corner of a bustling conference center in Washington, D.C. The National AI Policy Summit had drawn thousands of attendees from around the world: technologists, policymakers, civil rights advocates, and business leaders, all gathered to discuss the rapidly evolving landscape of artificial intelligence governance. Alexander, now in his early 60s with silver hair and lines of experience etched into his face, was no longer the ambitious CEO he had once been. After stepping down from his operational role at Quantum Vision years earlier, he had dedicated himself to advancing ethical AI through his work with the Algorithmic Justice Foundation, various government advisory roles, and teaching at several universities. As he sipped his coffee, watching the diverse crowd flow through the exhibition hall, he reflected on how much had changed since that fateful day when he had confidently implemented Project Optimization, believing that an algorithm could make better, more objective decisions about human livelihoods than humans themselves. "Dr. Mitchell?" A young woman approached his table. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to say that your book was what inspired me to pursue a career in AI ethics." Alexander smiled warmly. "Thank you, that's very kind. What area are you working in now?" I'm with the Civil Rights Division at the Department of Justice, focusing on algorithmic discrimination cases, she replied. Your experience at Quantum Vision is actually required reading for our team. As they chatted briefly about her work, Alexander was struck by how the painful lessons of the algorithm crisis continued to ripple outward, influencing a new generation of professionals dedicated to ensuring that technology served human flourishing rather than undermining it. After the young woman departed, Alexander checked his watch. He had a panel discussion in 30 minutes, a retrospective on the impact of the Algorithmic Accountability Act that had been passed a decade earlier with his advocacy. As he gathered his notes, he noticed a familiar face approaching. Dr. Zoe Washington, his former colleague, and the woman who had succeeded him as CEO of Quantum Vision before eventually moving on to found her own AI ethics consultancy. Perfect timing, Zoe said as she joined him. I was hoping to catch you before the panel. Have you seen the news? Alexander shook his head. I've been avoiding my phone this morning. What news? Talent Metrics just announced they're shutting down, Zoe said, referring to a controversial AI hiring platform that had been the subject of multiple discrimination lawsuits in recent years. The class action finally forced them to open their algorithm to independent auditing, and what the auditors found was apparently so damning that their investors pulled out overnight. Alexander nodded slowly. Justice delayed but not denied. How many people were affected by their systems over the years? Millions, Zoe replied soberly. Which is why the work continues. For every talent metrics that gets caught, there are dozens more operating in the shadows. Their conversation was interrupted by a ping from Alexander's phone. It was a message from Carlos Diaz, the former Quantum Vision employee who had been targeted by the biased algorithm years ago and had since become a close friend and collaborator. Just landed. See you at the panel. Big news to share. Alexander smiled. Carlos had been working on a groundbreaking community-based AI governance project in several cities, demonstrating how local communities could effectively oversee and regulate algorithmic systems affecting their neighborhoods. As they made their way toward the main hall for the panel discussion, Alexander and Zoe passed a booth showcasing Quantum Vision's latest initiatives. Under the leadership of its current CEO, Maya Rodriguez, the former tenants' rights advocate, who had been skeptical of the company's initial outreach efforts, Quantum Vision had evolved into one of the most respected names in responsible AI development. Its public interest technology division, once a small experimental unit, now represented over 40% of the company's operations. Its ethical AI certification program had become the industry standard, and its collaborative approach to technology development, centering the perspectives of those most likely to be affected by new systems, had proven not just ethically sound, but commercially successful. Sometimes I still can't believe how far we've come, Zoe remarked, as they paused to observe a demonstration of one of Quantum Vision's community co-designed systems. Remember those early post-crisis days when investors were predicting our doom for prioritizing ethics over efficiency? Alexander nodded. And now the companies that refuse to adapt are the ones struggling. It turns out that building technology that people can actually trust is a sustainable business model after all. As they entered the main hall, they were greeted by a diverse panel of experts already assembled on stage. Rebecca Johnson, the former Quantum Vision employee who had transformed her experience of algorithmic harm into a distinguished career in technological ethics. Maya Rodriguez, representing Quantum Vision's continued leadership in the field. Carlos Diaz, fresh from his community governance work, and several other leaders in AI policy and regulation. Alexander took his seat among them, feeling a profound sense of both accomplishment and humility. The algorithm crisis that had once seemed like the end of his career had instead been the beginning of his most important work. The painful lessons learned through that failure had catalyzed changes far beyond what he could have imagined in those dark days 15 years earlier. As the moderator introduced the panel and the audience settled into attentive silence, Alexander glanced out at the faces before him. Technologists and advocates, policymakers and business leaders, all engaged in the crucial work of ensuring that artificial intelligence served human flourishing. The journey was far from over. New challenges emerged constantly as technology continued to evolve. The work of creating ethical AI systems that respected human dignity and advanced justice remained complex and sometimes contentious. But the fundamental shift in perspective that had begun with Quantum Vision's algorithm crisis had taken root, and grown into a movement that spanned industries, disciplines, and communities. When it came time for Alexander to speak, he set aside his prepared remarks and instead shared a reflection that captured what he had come to understand through his 15-year journey from technological hubris to ethical advocacy. The most important innovation in technology isn't a new algorithm or a more powerful system, he said. It's a new way of thinking about why we build technology in the first place, who should have a voice in how it's designed, and what values it should serve. It's the recognition that the most sophisticated AI will never replace the need for human wisdom, judgment, and responsibility. And it's the commitment to ensuring that the technological future we create is one that honors and enhances our shared humanity rather than diminishing it. As applause filled the hall, Alexander felt a sense of closure. The algorithm crisis would always be part of his story, a painful failure that had caused real harm to real people. But it had also been the catalyst for a transformation, both personal and collective, that continued to ripple outward, shaping a technological future more aligned with human dignity, justice, and flourishing. And that, he reflected as the panel discussion began in earnest, was perhaps the most important lesson of all, that our most painful failures, when faced with courage and humility, can become the foundation for our most valuable contributions.